Chapter 1. The first human ship arrived before the fire department. Governor Sarek would remember that detail for the rest of his life. Not because it was the largest ship in orbit. It was not. Not because it carried soldiers. It did not. Not because its captain demanded authority, recognition, or payment. She demanded none of those things. The ship was an old mining tug named Good Neighbor. Its hull was scarred, its paint had faded in 3 different places, and one of its maneuvering thrusters coughed every time it corrected course. It should not have mattered, but 12 minutes after the explosion aboard Lattice Station, while the official rescue cutters were still launching from the far side of the moon, Good Neighbor detached from its ore barge and drove straight toward the burning docks. Governor Sarek watched it happen from the emergency chamber beneath the Colonial Administration Tower. Half the displays were dark. The rest showed smoke, static, or fragments of panicked messages. Lattice Station hung above the Capitol like a broken ring. 3 of its passenger terminals were without power. 2 docking arms had folded inward after the blast. A fuel transfer line had ruptured, and blue flame moved along the station's outer spine. 38,000 people were aboard. The nearest professional orbital rescue unit would arrive in 2 hours and 41 minutes. The station's life support reserve was estimated at 90 minutes. Sarek stared at the figures until they stopped looking like numbers. "Governor," said Commander Vec, the colony's military liaison. "A civilian vessel has entered the exclusion zone. Order it away." We did, and it ignored us. On the central display, Good Neighbor rotated broadside to the station. Cargo doors opened. 6 tiny work pods spilled into vacuum. Sarek blinked. "What are they doing?" Vec enlarged the image. The pods were mining vehicles, industrial cutters, hull crawlers, equipment designed to chew through asteroid rock and repair drilling platforms, not rescue craft. The lead pod reached the collapsed docking arm and locked onto the metal with magnetic clamps. A human voice cut across the emergency channel. "Lattice Control, this is Good Neighbor. We have 6 pressure-rated work pods, 23 suits, 2 medical technicians, and portable atmosphere. Mark us a corridor." The station controller answered through heavy static. "Good Neighbor, you are not certified for emergency operations." "Understood. You are ordered to hold position." "Can't do that." "Captain, this is a legal exclusion zone." "Then send me the fine after we get these people out." The channel went quiet. Sarek looked at Vec. Vec looked back. Neither had a useful response. The human voice returned. "We can open Terminal 4 from the exterior. Is anyone tracking occupied compartments?" A station operator answered. "We lost internal sensors." "All right, start with last known passenger manifests. Put anyone with a working terminal on local Channel 7. Tell them to bang on the walls when they hear cutting." "Who authorized you to establish a channel?" "No one. Are you going to use it or not?" The operator hesitated for less than a second. "Local Channel 7. Good Neighbor out." Commander Vec's jaw tightened. "This is disorder." Sarek watched the mining pods begin cutting through a sealed transit corridor. "No," he said slowly. "Disorder is what we had 5 minutes ago." Behind him, another officer turned from her console. "Governor, more civilian ships are changing course." "How many?" 11. The display updated. Cargo shuttles. "A private yacht." 2 construction barges, a fuel tender, a passenger ferry, every one of them human-owned. "Why?" Sarek asked. No one answered. Then the communications officer raised her hand. "We are receiving an open broadcast from the human settlement at Riverbend." "Put it through." A woman's voice filled the chamber. "All available volunteers, Lattice Station has declared a mass casualty emergency. Report capabilities and transport status to the Riverbend Community Net. Do not self-deploy to the station unless assigned. Medical personnel report to Assembly Hall 2. Licensed pilots report to East Field. Amateur radio operators activate emergency protocol. Anyone with spare oxygen cylinders, portable generators, or pressure tents, log them now." The message repeated. Sarek stared at the speaker. "Who is issuing that order?" The communications officer checked. "A schoolteacher." Commander Vec leaned closer. "A government official? No. Military reserve? No. Emergency contractor? No." The officer looked confused. "She appears to be the coordinator of a local volunteer association." Sarek turned back toward the burning station. The first mining pod had opened a hole. People were coming out. Chapter 2. The humans did not arrive as an army. That was what made Commander Vec suspicious. Armies were understandable. They had uniforms, ranks, supply chains, orders. The humans arrived wearing everything. Orange industrial suits, white medical coats, blue utility coveralls, red fire jackets, gray pressure armor. Civilian clothing beneath hastily attached breathing gear. Some carried professional equipment, others carried toolboxes. One elderly man stepped off a shuttle holding 3 coils of cable, a paper notebook, and a dented metal thermos. Vec met the first group at East Field, where civilian aircraft were landing faster than ground crews could guide them. The human woman at the front wore a yellow vest with the words Volunteer Coordinator printed across the back. She carried a radio in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Who commands you?" Vec asked. She did not stop walking. "At the moment, Mara Singh." "Who is Mara Singh?" "I am. You command these civilians. I coordinate them." "That is the same thing." "No, it isn't." She reached a folding table someone had placed beside the landing pad and began arranging colored markers. Vec followed. "Under whose authority are you operating?" Mara looked up. "Governor declared an emergency. He did not request your assistance. Does he not need it?" "That is not the question. It is the useful question." She pulled a sheet of plastic across the table and drew 4 vertical columns. Personnel, equipment, transport, assignment. Vec watched names begin appearing beneath each heading. "You cannot simply take control of a colonial airfield." "I'm not taking control. You are directing aircraft. I'm preventing 3 ambulances and a plumbing truck from landing in the same place." A shuttle dropped toward the western pad. Mara lifted her radio. "Blue 6, hold 30 seconds. Medical 1, clear west pad and taxi north." "Loader crew, I need that oxygen pallet off the surface immediately." The commands were repeated by different voices. The shuttle paused. The ambulance moved. The pallet disappeared onto a freight cart. No one saluted. No one challenged her. They simply did what was useful. Vec had spent 20 years studying military mobilization. This looked like mobilization. It lacked every feature by which mobilization was supposed to function. "How many personnel do you have?" he asked. Mara glanced at the list. "Here, 112 checked in. Another 300 inbound." "Who pays them?" "No one." Vec assumed the translator had failed. "Repeat. They're volunteers. What organization compensates them?" "None. Then why are they here?" Mara looked genuinely puzzled. "Because people need help." Vec waited for the rest of the explanation. It did not come. A young human approached, carrying a helmet. "Mara, Riverbend Fire has 4 pressure teams ready. They brought thermal drones and structural shoring. Assign 2 to Terminal 4. Hold 1 for secondary collapse. Send 1 to the refinery fire." "Copy. Who's team lead?" "Chief Alvarez." "Volunteer chief or city chief?" "Volunteer." "Good, he knows the refinery." The young man ran off. Vec stared. "You have volunteer firefighters." "Of course. Fire is dangerous." "Yes. Then why would uncoerced civilians train to enter it?" Mara capped a marker. "Because someone has to." That sentence would appear 12 times in Vec's after-action report. Each time he would underline it. Chapter 3. Governor Sarek reached East Field 40 minutes later. By then the airfield had transformed. The change was so complete that he stopped at the edge of the landing zone and wondered whether he had come to the wrong place. Tents stood in rows. A communications mast rose above the terminal roof. Colored flags marked medical, transport, logistics, and family reunification. Vehicles entered through one lane and exited through another. Every arriving person passed a check-in table. Every piece of equipment received a number. Every assignment appeared on the large status board under the shelter awning. Nothing looked improvised. Everything had been improvised. Mara Singh met him with a radio clipped to her shoulder. "Governor, good timing." Sarek almost laughed. The colony was burning in orbit. Thousands were trapped, and this civilian spoke as if he had arrived for a meeting. "What do you require?" he asked. "Authority to use the old freight warehouse as a shelter, priority access to the municipal water reserves, and 1 representative from your administration at Unified Command." "Unified Command?" "Your people, station personnel, professional emergency services, military and volunteer groups in one place. Shared objectives, shared information, no one freelancing." Commander Vec stepped beside Sarek. "Your volunteers are already freelancing." Mara shook her head. "Self-deployed volunteers are freelancing. We are stopping that. By giving them orders, by giving them assignments." Vec's eyes narrowed. "Again, you pretend there is a distinction. There is. An order rests on authority, an assignment rests on agreement. And if they refuse, then I don't use them." Sarek studied the field. No one appeared reluctant. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked. Mara's expression did not change. "We keep rescuing people with less coordination." It was not a threat. That made it more persuasive. Sarek approved all 3 requests. Within 20 minutes, the old freight warehouse became Shelter 1. Within 30, the Municipal Water Authority had placed a technician at the command post. Within 45, the first unified briefing began. The command post was a converted cargo office. Its walls were covered with maps. A portable screen showed the station, the capital, Riverbend settlement, hospital capacity, transport routes, and available oxygen supplies. At the center stood an ordinary table. Around it gathered the colonial governor, the military commander, station engineers, professional responders, and 6 civilians who held no official office. Mara spoke first. Current priorities: 1. Extract trapped passengers from terminals 4 through 6. 2. Stop fire spread along the station's spine. 3. Expand field medical capacity. 4. Establish reliable communications. 5. Track evacuated passengers and reunify families. 6. Protect drinking water and power on the ground. Commander Vec pointed to the list. Where is security? Under every priority. That is not an answer. It is, we secure landing zones so aircraft can move, we secure shelters so families are safe, we secure fuel so vehicles keep running, we secure information so rumors don't cause panic. You have no armed units. Mara gestured toward him. You do. Vec fell silent. The station engineer leaned forward. Terminal 6 is inaccessible. The internal corridor collapsed. A human in soot-darkened fire gear raised his hand. We can breach from the maintenance spine. You do not know the station design. No, but your engineer does. The engineer looked at him. You would follow my instructions. Absolutely. You are not under my command. No, but you know the station. Across the room, a retired human nurse spoke. Field hospital has 60 beds operational. We can reach 120 in 2 hours, but we need sanitation. The colonial water technician answered. I can supply tanks. Clean, not without treatment. An elderly man with the thermos lifted one finger. I have 6 portable purification units coming from the agricultural cooperative. Everyone looked at him. Sarek asked, you own water purification equipment? No, the cooperative does. Why? Flood season. This colony has no floods. Riverbend does. Riverbend is on a plateau, the man shrugged. Humans built the settlement before they finished the weather models. No one knew what to say to that. Myra wrote water, solved on the board. Sorek watched problem after problem move from chaos into columns. Not vanish, not become easy, become assigned. He had spent his career believing leadership meant making decisions. The humans treated leadership as the discipline of ensuring every decision had an owner, a resource, and a time. It felt less heroic. It worked much better. Chapter 4. The first rescue dog arrived at Shelter 1 shortly after sunset. Ambassador Karath was not present. Had he been, the diplomatic consequences might have been severe. Commander Vec saw the animal jump from a transport vehicle wearing protective boots and a fitted breathing harness. It was smaller than the dogs he had seen in human security units. Lean, tan, alert. Its handler clipped a sensor pack to its vest. Vec intercepted them. Animals are not permitted in a mass casualty shelter. Handler looked toward the dog. She isn't going into the shelter. Then why is it here? Search team. Vec looked at the animal again. You use predators to locate survivors. She tracks human scent. The victims are not human. She tracks biological scent, movement, breath, and trained indicators. Station rescue already gave us samples. The dog sat and looked up at him. Vec took one involuntary step backward. The handler smiled. Her name is Juniper. I did not ask. People usually do. They should not. 10 minutes later, Juniper entered the fractured lower transit terminal with 3 volunteer search specialists and 2 colonial engineers. The terminal had partially collapsed after debris from orbit struck the city. Professional scanners showed no clear life signs. The rescue teams had marked it for delayed excavation. Juniper disagreed. She stopped beside a slab of composite flooring and barked. The handler listened through the rubble. Nothing. Juniper barked again, then scratched at a crack. The engineers brought acoustic sensors. A faint pattern appeared. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. 7 people were alive beneath the floor. The volunteers worked for 4 hours. They used inflatable lifting bags borrowed from a construction company, timber braces cut by a local carpenter, and a compact camera owned by a sewer inspection crew. At 02:17, they pulled out a child. At 02:21, the child's mother. At 03:04, the final survivor emerged. Commander Vec stood outside the terminal as Juniper drank water from a collapsible bowl. The handler sat beside her, exhausted. Vec approached. The animal performed well. She did. How much is she paid? The handler looked at him. Paid for this service. She gets food, medical care, toys, and too much attention. I meant you. Oh, nothing. Vec's expression hardened. You entered an unstable structure without compensation. Yes, you could have died. Yes. Why? The handler glanced toward the survivors being loaded into ambulances. Because they couldn't get out. Vec looked at the damaged terminal. then at the humans, then at the dog. That is not a complete explanation. It is to us. Chapter 5. By the second day, the colony had more volunteers than it knew how to use. They arrived from every human settlement within 6 hours of flight. Some came with training, some came with equipment, some came with enthusiasm and no useful understanding of disaster zones. The last group created the greatest danger. Mara Singh established a volunteer reception center outside the capital. Every new arrival was registered, skills were verified, credentials were checked. Those with emergency training went to field operations. Those with practical trades went to logistics and repair. Those with no relevant experience went to food preparation, shelter support, debris sorting, donation management, and family services. Those who refused assignments were sent home. This offended several humans. One man arrived wearing tactical equipment and announced that he was ready for rescue work. Mara asked for his certifications. He had none. She assigned him to move blankets. He protested. She assigned him to move blankets somewhere farther away. Commander Vec witnessed the exchange. You dismissed a willing fighter. We don't need fighters. He possessed armor. We need people who listen. What if his skills were useful? Then he can prove them later. During a disaster, unverified confidence is a hazard. Vec considered that. Military organizations understood the danger of unverified confidence very well. You discipline volunteers, I manage risk. A new convoy entered the center. Private ground vehicles, farm haulers. Delivery trucks. One polished passenger transport still displayed the logo of a luxury hotel. Its driver leaned out the window. 20 seats, climate control, full tank. Mara pointed him toward the shelter transfer line. The next vehicle was a refrigerated food truck. The one after that carried portable toilets. The one after that carried children's toys. Vec watched the column pass. Who organized this convoy? No one. Someone must have. Different groups offered what they had. The community network matched needs to resources. Without payment, without payment. Without government requisition, without requisition. Without legal obligation, correct. Vec rubbed the ridge above his eyes. Your economy should not function, Mara laughed. This isn't the economy. What is it? Community. The word translated correctly. Its meaning did not. On Vec's world, community described a place, a legal district, or a population category. Humans used it as a verb. They built it, practiced it, activated it. At 11:30, Mara received a new report. The primary shelter kitchen had lost power. Within 8 minutes, a volunteer amateur radio operator relayed the need across the local emergency net. Within 22 minutes, 3 restaurants delivered prepared food. Within 40, a religious congregation opened its commercial kitchen. Within an hour, retired catering workers had organized meal service for 6,000 people. No contract was signed. No bids were requested. No department issued an order. The system behaved as if every citizen carried a small piece of emergency government inside them. That frightened Vec more than the armed forces ever had. Chapter 6. Governor Sorek visited the field hospital on the 3rd morning. It occupied what had once been an exhibition hall. Rows of beds stretched beneath suspended lights. Curtains divided treatment areas. Portable diagnostic equipment hummed beside old trade show displays. One section handled smoke exposure. Another handled fractures. A third served patients who did not need medical intervention but could not stop shaking. Sorek recognized the lead physician from the colonial hospital. He did not recognize most of the people working beside her. A human nurse checked medication labels. A retired surgeon supervised wound care. 2 veterinary technicians cleaned instruments. A group of students carried supplies. At the far end of the hall, 3 volunteers sat with children while their parents received treatment. Sorek found Director Lion Chen near the triage desk. She had arrived the previous night aboard the first official human disaster response ship. Her uniform carried the emblem of the Human Mutual Aid Directorate. Unlike the volunteers, she possessed formal authority. That did not appear to make her more important. Director, Sorek said, I expected your agency to take command when you arrived. Chen watched a volunteer wheel an elderly patient toward imaging. Why, you are professionals. So are many of them. They are unpaid. Payment is not the definition of competence. Then what is? Training, experience, accountability, knowing your limits. She turned toward him. Our job is not to replace the volunteers. It is to connect them to the system, fill gaps, and keep them safe. Sorek looked around the hall. How many of these people belong to your agency? 46. And the rest? 312 volunteers across 2 shifts. How can you trust them? We don't trust everyone equally. We credential them. That sounds distrustful. It is respectful. People deserve work they are prepared to do. A volunteer approached. Director, blood storage is at 70%. We can support current demand for 16 hours. Any resupply? Human settlements launch donors. First batch arrives in 3 hours. Sorek frowned. Donors, people giving blood. I understand the word. Why would they do that for strangers? Chen's expression softened. Because someday the stranger may be them. Sorek thought of the colony's civic systems, taxes, fees, contracts, obligations, every contribution measured, every service assigned. Human generosity seemed dangerously imprecise, yet blood was arriving, food was arriving. Water was flowing. Children had blankets, families were being reunited, the imprecision worked. Director, Sorek said, what do your people receive in return? Sometimes thanks. That cannot be sufficient. No, then what? Chen looked across the hall. A volunteer firefighter was laughing with an alien child while repairing the strap on the child's breathing mask. A retired teacher was reading names from a reunification list. A mechanic slept upright against a supply crate. They received the knowledge that when something terrible happened, they were not absent. Sorek stood silently. On his world, status came from what one possessed. Among humans, there appeared to be another kind. Status earned from having shown up. Chapter 7. The rumor began at noon. The station reactor was going critical. It was false. The reactor had shut down during the initial blast. A damaged coolant monitor produced an intermittent alarm, and someone misunderstood a maintenance message. Within minutes, thousands of people at Shelter 1 began preparing to flee. Families packed belongings. Vehicles blocked the exits. A frightened crowd pushed toward the transport lanes. Commander Vec ordered security personnel into formation. Director Chen stopped him. Not yet. The shelter is destabilizing. Soldiers will confirm the rumor. They will restore order. They may create panic. Vec pointed toward the exits. Panic already exists. Chen lifted a radio. Activate rumor control. Put the station engineer on every local channel. Send trusted volunteers into each shelter section. No technical language. Repeat the same message. Vec stared at her. You will counter mass fear with conversation, with trusted messengers. Across the shelter, volunteers moved. The retired teacher stood on a supply crate. The reactor is shut down. There is no radiation release. Engineers are monitoring the station. We are safe here. A volunteer medic repeated the message near triage. A human mechanic repeated it in the vehicle line. A religious leader repeated it beside the family area. The station engineer appeared on portable screens. My name is Talon Orr. I am the chief reactor engineer. The reactor is not critical. The alarm is from a damaged monitor. I would move my own family if there were danger. My family is in shelter, too. The crowd slowed, not immediately, not completely, but the panic stopped spreading. Vec lowered his hand. His soldiers remained back. How did you know? He asked. Chen looked toward the volunteers. People believe institutions when life is normal. During a crisis, they often believe people they recognize. You planned for this? We planned for fear. Vec watched a volunteer kneel beside an elderly alien and explain the reactor status for the third time. The volunteer had no badge of office. No weapon, no authority, only credibility. That afternoon, Vec added a new section to his report. Civilian trust networks as strategic infrastructure. He disliked the phrase. It was accurate. Chapter 8. The final major rescue occurred on the 5th day. A maintenance habitat had detached from Lattice Station during the explosion and entered a decaying orbit. It carried 59 workers. Its emergency thrusters were damaged. Its docking collar was warped. The professional rescue cutter could match orbit but could not attach without risking structural failure. Good Neighbor could. The old mining tug had already flown 31 missions. Its captain, Lena Ortiz, had slept 6 hours since the disaster began. Director Chen ordered her to stand down. Lena refused. Chen threatened to revoke her flight clearance. Lena pointed out that the tug had been built before the current clearance regulations. The argument lasted 11 minutes. They compromised. A rested volunteer pilot took the controls. Lena remained aboard as systems engineer. Commander Vec observed from the operations center. Your director allowed an insubordinate civilian to participate. Mara Singh nodded. After replacing her as pilot and adding a professional rescue officer. That is poor discipline. That is risk management. You use that phrase frequently because disasters are mostly risk moving around. Good Neighbor reached the habitat 40 minutes before atmospheric entry. The tug could not dock. Instead, its crew extended a mining stabilization frame around the habitat. Industrial clamps locked onto non-standard surfaces. The same equipment used to hold fractured asteroids together now held 59 people above a planet. The rescue cutter transferred them through flexible pressure tunnels. The final worker crossed with 9 minutes remaining. Good Neighbor released the habitat. It burned in the upper atmosphere. At East Field, hundreds of volunteers watched the survivors step from the transport. No speeches had been planned. No ceremony had been organized. Someone began clapping. Then everyone did. The sound rolled across the airfield. Governor Sarek stood beside Commander Vec. "Are they celebrating the professionals or the volunteers?" Sarek asked. Vec watched firefighters embrace miners, nurses wave to pilots, and exhausted civilians cheer people whose names they did not know. "I believe they are celebrating the result," the governor nodded. "That may be the most human thing we have seen." Vec considered the statement. "No," he said, "the most human thing is that half of them will return to work tomorrow and never mention they were here." Chapter 9. Galactic Council inquiry began 3 months later. Officially, it examined the Lattice Station disaster. Unofficially, it examined humanity. The council chamber filled with delegates from 73 worlds. They reviewed footage of mining tugs entering exclusion zones, volunteer firefighters cutting through alien bulkheads, private citizens donating blood, amateur radio operators restoring communications, restaurant workers feeding shelters, and civilians directing traffic beneath falling debris. Several delegates were impressed. Others were alarmed. The representative from the VE Compact spoke first. Human volunteer networks possess rapid mobilization capability, decentralized communications, independent transport, medical assets, engineering expertise, and local command structures. Director Chen sat at the witness table. "Yes, these resemble military reserves. Some skills overlap. How many such personnel exist? That depends on the definition." "Use the broadest." Chen glanced at her notes. "On Earth and the major colonies, approximately 200 million people participate in some form of organized volunteer service each year." The chamber erupted. The presiding officer struck the table. "Order!" The VE representative leaned forward. 200 million irregular personnel? No, volunteers. Trained in emergency response? Some. Others work in food distribution, education, animal rescue, community health, environmental restoration, elder care, youth programs, shelters, communications, and many other areas. Without compensation? Usually. Then what compels participation? Nothing. The chamber became quiet. The representative's voice lowered. "That is impossible," Chen smiled faintly. "Lattice Station suggests otherwise," another delegate spoke. "Perhaps humans volunteer because their government cannot provide necessary services." "Sometimes volunteers fill gaps," Chen said. "Sometimes they add capacity. Sometimes they create services government never would. Sometimes government and volunteers work together." "Why not simply employ them? Because not every useful act needs to become a profession." The delegate looked disturbed. "All useful labor has value." "Yes, value must be compensated, not always with money." That answer produced more confusion than any statistic. Governor Sarek testified next. He described the first 5 days. He described the volunteers who arrived before professionals. He described the reception center, the field hospital, the rumor control teams, the amateur radio network, the search dog, the community kitchens, and the mining tug. Then Commander Vec presented his report. He had revised it 27 times. The final version contained 400 pages. His spoken summary contained 9 words. "We believed they lacked command. They possessed something broader." The presiding officer asked, "What?" Vec looked toward the human delegation. Commitment without coercion. Chapter 10. 1 year after the disaster, the new Lattice Station opened. Its design included redundant docking rings, isolated fuel lines, external rescue access, and emergency systems modeled on human recommendations. The dedication ceremony drew officials from across the galaxy. So did the memorial. 52 names were carved into a wall overlooking the capital. The number could have been thousands. Governor Sarek stood before the crowd. Behind him were professional rescuers, military personnel, station engineers, medical staff, and volunteers. Mara Singh wore no uniform. Lena Ortiz wore a clean version of the jacket she had worn aboard Good Neighbor. Juniper, the search dog, sat beside her handler and attempted to eat a ceremonial ribbon. Sarek began with the expected words. He thanked the agencies. He praised courage. He honored the dead. Then he looked down at his prepared speech and set it aside. "When the station burned," he said, "we waited for those responsible for saving us." The crowd grew still. "We waited for government, we waited for professionals, we waited for the military." He looked toward the volunteers. "The humans did not wait. They came because they had a ship. They came because they had tools. They came because they knew medicine, wiring, cooking, flying, teaching, lifting, listening, or simply how to carry a box where it needed to go." A few humans smiled. They came because someone had to. Commander Vec lowered his eyes. Sarek continued. Our civilization believed duty was created by office. Humanity taught us that office is only one way to recognize duty. He raised one hand toward the rebuilt station. This structure was rebuilt by contracts, governments, engineers, and paid labor. Then he gestured toward the memorial. The lives represented by the empty spaces on this wall were saved by something harder to measure. People who decided that another person's emergency had become their concern. The applause began quietly. It grew until the entire plaza shook. After the ceremony, the crowd moved toward the station gardens. Vec found Mara near the memorial. You still work at the school? He asked. Yes. You were offered a position in the Colonial Emergency Agency. I know. You declined. I like teaching. You coordinated thousands of responders. For 5 days. You were effective. I had practiced. Why would a school teacher practice disaster coordination? Mara looked toward the memorial wall. My town floods. Rarely. Rarely is not never. Vec considered that answer. A year earlier, he would have found it irrational. Now he understood. Humans prepared not because disaster was certain. They prepared because someone would need help when certainty failed. Near the garden entrance, Juniper's handler removed the dog's ceremonial vest. Several alien children gathered around. Juniper rolled onto her back. The children hesitated. Then one reached down. Vec watched the animal trust them. He had learned a great deal about humanity since the station disaster. He had learned that humans built systems from imperfect people, that they practiced for events they hoped would never occur, that they trusted strangers with responsibility, then verified their skills, that they argued, improvised, overcommitted, ignored sensible flight restrictions, and brought entirely too much coffee. But the most important lesson was simpler. A civilization could measure its strength by fleets, by wealth, by territory, by the reach of its government. Humanity measured strength another way, by how many people would come when no one could make them. Years later, the Galactic Council established the Mutual Aid Charter. Every member world created volunteer fire brigades, emergency communications clubs, medical reserve groups, food networks, rescue associations, and community response teams. The program struggled at first. Many citizens asked why they should work without pay. Instructors offered incentives. Governments offered recognition. Some worlds offered tax benefits. The humans said none of those things were wrong, but they were not the answer. The answer arrived during a flood on the colony of Veltor. A young shopkeeper closed his store, loaded blankets into his delivery vehicle, and drove toward the evacuation zone. At a checkpoint, an officer stopped him. Who ordered you here? No one. Who is paying you? No one. Then why did you come? The shopkeeper looked toward the dark water covering the road. He had never visited Earth. He had never met Mara Singh. He had only read the Lattice Station report. Because someone has to. The officer stepped aside, and for the first time the phrase no longer belonged only to humanity. Epilogue. The phrase spread faster than the charter. It appeared first in training halls, then on the sides of rescue vehicles, then on patches worn by volunteers who had never met a human, because someone has to. The words were not an order. That was why they mattered. 5 years after Lattice Station, Commander Vec returned to Riverbend. He was no longer a commander. The council had appointed him director of the Interstellar Office of Civil Mutual Aid, a title so long that Mara Singh refused to use it. You look tired, she said when he entered her classroom. I supervise programs on 41 worlds, so you are tired. Children's drawings covered the walls. Some showed stars, some showed rescue ships. One showed an animal that might have been Juniper, except it had 6 legs and wings. Mara collected papers from the desks. What brings the famous director to a primary school? A problem. Those usually do. Vec placed a tablet on her desk. The display showed participation figures. Volunteer enrollment had grown rapidly on many worlds, then declined. Training groups formed. Governments funded equipment. Citizens attended ceremonies, but when emergencies occurred, too many waited for instructions. They have copied the structure, Vec said. They have not copied the behavior. Mara read the report. They made volunteering another department. We believed organization would make it reliable. Organization helps. It is not enough. No. Vec sat in a chair designed for a child and immediately regretted it. What is missing? Mara looked through the classroom window. Outside, parents and students worked in the school garden. No one had assigned them. Some planted vegetables, some repaired a fence. One elderly woman handed drinks to everyone else. Ownership, Mara said. The garden belongs to the school. Not legal ownership, personal ownership. They think the problem belongs to somebody else until somebody else gives it to them. Is that not the purpose of authority? Authority can assign responsibility. It can't make people care. Vec disliked conclusions that could not be placed into procedural manuals. How do humans make people care? We don't. That is unhelpful. We give them chances to practice caring. Mara tapped the participation report. Don't begin with disasters, begin with ordinary things. Let people coach children, visit elders, clean parks, repair neighbors' homes, foster animals, teach skills. Let them discover that helping is something they can do, not something reserved for professionals. This appears inefficient. It is. You admit that? Community is inefficient, so are friendships, so is trust. The inefficiency is where the relationship forms. Vec stared at the garden. A child dropped a tray of seedlings. 3 adults bent to help before the child asked. No command, no payment, no emergency, just practice. The Office of Civil Mutual Aid changed its doctrine the following year. Volunteer programs stopped beginning with uniforms and emergency exercises. They began with small work. Meals delivered, roads cleaned, children taught, homes repaired, neighbors checked during heat waves. Participation grew more slowly. It lasted. On the colony of Taurus, dockworkers created a volunteer rescue unit after losing a colleague in an industrial accident. On Ener, retired navigators taught civilian pilots how to assist during evacuations. On Cold Arun, teenagers carried fuel cells to elderly residents during winter outages. On Vey Prime, where unpaid labor had once been considered irrational, accountants volunteered to help families recover financial records after a data center fire. None of these acts made galactic news. That was the point. The network became real in the years between disasters. Then came the collapse at Pelagos. A chain of undersea earthquakes damaged 3 habitat domes and severed the transit tunnels connecting them to the surface. The professional response forces mobilized within 11 minutes. So did everyone else. Fishing crews marked safe channels, recreational divers reported equipment, restaurant kitchens prepared meals, teachers opened schools as shelters, private submersible owners transported medical personnel, amateur signal enthusiasts rebuilt communications through the water. Thousands participated. No human settlement was nearby. No human official directed them. Director Vec arrived 12 hours later aboard a council vessel. By then, local volunteers had registered 17,000 evacuees. They had established supply routes between the surviving domes. They had paired every professional rescue team with local guides. They had mapped households where mobility-limited residents might be trapped. They had even created a supervised play area for displaced children so their parents could help with recovery. At the operations center, Vec found the incident coordinator. She was a Pelagan marine biologist named Sella. Her species communicated emotion through changing patterns of light along the skin. At that moment, every light showed exhaustion. Vec reviewed the status board. You established unified command before the central government arrived. The Harbor Association had practiced. You mobilized civilian vessels. The fishing captains knew the water. You assigned untrained volunteers away from dangerous areas. Sella looked offended. Enthusiasm is not a qualification. Vec heard Mara's voice in the sentence. Who taught you that? The lattice doctrine. The director looked across the crowded room. Professionals and volunteers worked side by side. No one seemed concerned with which group deserved credit. Who ordered the volunteers to report? He asked. Sella's lights shifted in confusion. No one. Who compensated them? No one. Why did they come? Sella paused. The answer was obvious to her. That mattered more than the answer itself. Because someone had to. Vec turned away before anyone saw his expression. The words had crossed the distance between civilizations, not as a slogan. As an instinct. Months after Pelagos, Vec sent Mara a copy of the final report. He included only one personal note. You were correct. They required practice caring. Mara replied the same day, I know. Beneath the message was a photograph of her newest class. 24 children stood beside a stack of emergency supply boxes they had assembled for families displaced by a storm. In front of them sat Juniper, now gray around the muzzle, wearing a volunteer bandana. Vec saved the image. Official records credited the Mutual Aid Charter with changing emergency response across the council. Historians credited Lattice Station. Political leaders credited new institutions, funding agreements, and training standards. All of them were partly correct. But Vec knew where the change had truly begun. It began when an old mining tug crossed an exclusion line, when a teacher opened a radio channel, when firefighters entered a station that was not theirs, when strangers gave blood to people whose species they had never met. It began with the discovery that civilization was not merely what governments built. Civilization was what ordinary people refused to let collapse while the government was still on its way. And that was the lesson humanity had given the galaxy. not that humans were uniquely brave. Bravery had existed on every world, not that humans were uniquely skilled. Every civilization had experts, not even that humans were uniquely generous. Kindness was older than spaceflight. Humanity's gift was turning those qualities into habits, into clubs, into drills, into neighborhood lists and radio nets and spare keys and shared meals, into millions of small promises made before anyone knew who would need them. Promises that said, "When the water rises, I will bring the boat. When the lights fail, I will bring the generator. When the building falls, I will bring the tools. When you are lost, I will come looking. When you are frightened, I will stay. And when someone asks who ordered me to help, I will tell them the truth. No one did." Someone had to,